Hello and welcome to the Genre Fiction Podcast. I am Jack Roney.
And I'm Harry Colfer. Good evening.
Good
Or
to see
should I
you,
say
Harry.
good morning?
Yes, we've got a special guest coming all the way from the UK. So, our special guest author, Jamie West. Great to have you on board, Jamie. Welcome to the Genre Fiction Podcast.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
One of my questions was going to be your books are set in the sort of 1930s and even I know it's an audio podcast, so I'll see if I can get the images of your book covers and we'll put them up with our promo videos on socials. But your book covers really capture that golden age style of the 1930s kind of whodunit genre. What about your research? You talked about the two theaters that no longer exist. So I'm assuming these have since been demolished. These buildings are no longer here. How did you first learn about these long gone theaters that have since been demolished? And what research did you do, whether old photographs or old imagery, paintings, to sort of help you bring them back to life again?
Well, the first book was fantastic because I got to go to an archive in Brighton where they had tons and tons of material. They had photos just before it was demolished. They had plans, and luckily, because of my job, I find it quite easy to look at plans and imagine what the scenery looks like. So it's quite easy to look at an architectural plan and imagine what the building looks like. So that was good, and they were really helpful. And it was really fun because I felt like a proper researcher. I got to go to, I went to drama school. I did a stage management and technical theatre degree. There was no amount of in the library going through books like there would be, with a proper degree if you were doing English or history or classics or one of those things. There was none of that aspect of it really. So it was, it was really fun. I felt like a proper historian going in there and digging around and getting people, sometimes putting the white gloves on so you don't leave marks on the photos. That was, it's a proper cosplaying historian experience. Unfortunately for the second book, because it's London based, all of the archives are with the V&A. They've got a huge theatre section, but for the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, and I think they've still got another year to go, they're moving the archives from where they were to East London. It's this huge project and it's taking forever, but it means none of that stuff is accessible. So I found what I could on the internet, and you can search through newspaper records and stuff and kind of find bits of information about it. But I think, readers might notice that the description of the interior of the theatre in the second book probably isn't quite as detailed as the first, just because, that stuff simply I couldn't get hold of anywhere, unfortunately.
It's so cool that you've been able to go back and rediscover these since demolished old theaters and literally bring them back to life. Were you able to establish why did they get demolished in the first place?
Well, basically from, the period of my book and certainly from the Second World War onwards, theatre in the UK was kind of, I wouldn't say on its knees, but really declining. There used to be, I think in 1914 or whenever it was, someone did do a survey of all the theatres, and there were thousands of theatres, 1,000 theatres in the UK. And since then, I think nearly 80% of them have been lost, just because they were old. Cinema came along, TV came along, no one was going to them. And a lot of them were kind of music hall, kind of play the variety theatres as well, which, that completely fell out of favor as well. So a lot of them were demolished, and even some of the theatres that still exist now, in the course of over a period of history, have all been threatened with demolished to make way for roadworks, make way for new office buildings, all these kind of things. I mean, the Gaiety Theatre in this book, even though it was a performer that raised money and tried to save it, unfortunately, it was just too expensive to do up and reopen. That was turned into an office building, and that office building has since been demolished, and now it's been turned into a hotel. So it's, these things, I think people just didn't care about theatres that much, actually. Certainly in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, where people were kind of building and looking to the future, I guess. And like I said, there was, cinema was new thing. I think there was a period where a new Odeon opened in the UK, once a week for a while. That's how quick they were building these. I mean, they're gorgeous because, I love a bit of 1930s architecture, and a lot of those Odeons are fantastic examples of that. But yeah, it was at the expense of theatres. And actually, talking of theatres and cinema, a lot of the theatres, well, not a lot of them, but several of the theatres actually operated as cinemas for a long time. The Dominion Theatre, which is now a really successful, what's on there at the moment? It's quite a big, successful theatre in London. That's where Star Wars premiered in the 70s, 80s, and so on. In the UK, that was a big cinema, and now it's back to theatrical use. So these things are changing, and what is exciting to see in the UK and certainly in London now is there are new theatres opening all the time. Every year there's a brand new theatre opening in London. So theatre is kind of back and growing, hopefully in a good way. And hopefully these new theatres are going to last much longer than the theatres from the past, some of which were only around for 20 years before they got, they were built in 1910, say, and were demolished in 1930. Some of these places didn't have a very long lifespan, unfortunately.
Yeah, I remember when I was moved to Derbyshire when I was about 14, 15, and I remember there being like a cinema there that used to be a theatre, but it got closed down, and it was literally because everyone was watching videos, and it was like, why would you want to go to the cinema? And then it was only a few years later, then it was like, actually, we want to actually see this. We want to go watch a big movie, and I think it's done that sort of like cycle round. But I remember it being all closed up, which is a sad thing to see because it's these lovely old buildings and they're just all boarded up.
Yeah, it is. It's such a shame. And I think, nowadays as well, I think people are loving those times that we are able to get together. People go to concerts or whatever, people go to the cinema, and people are going, especially young people on certain shows anyway, seem to be coming back to the theatre really passionately. So yeah, it is quite exciting to see. But yeah, it is such a shame that we did lose so many of these theatres because you can't beat those Edwardian and Victorian theatre builders and architects. They really knew what they were doing, because
the acoustics and
even the
everything.
best theatre today, you just can't beat it. They knew what they were doing.
It's so sad that those beautiful old buildings were lost for economical reasons or other reasons. They've just been lost to history. And I think that highlights the importance of your books, the fact that you're probably bringing back to life these theatres and bringing it back to the attention of people that might not have otherwise known about these lost buildings.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And especially the Gaiety does kind of live on in a few people's memories. It was only demolished in, I think, the late 50s. So there are some people around that sort of still vaguely remember it. The one in Brighton, the Palace Pier Theatre at the end of the pier, was demolished, or quite scandalously, in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was listed. It's like a listed building. It was supposed to be kept and put back, but they sort of accidentally, on purpose, lost it, and then it never went back, unfortunately. But what's interesting, a few people that have read the book that live in Brighton, they were like, they had no idea that there was a pier, that there was a theatre there. And to kind of, yeah, it's really exciting to bring that history back to life in kind of fiction form, really, because obviously in a non-fiction book you can write about the theatres, you can describe them, you can do their history, but theatres are such living, breathing places that fiction is a great place to bring them back, because not only can you recreate them, you can recreate the atmosphere and the sort of people that existed in them. And that's been really exciting for me.
I would imagine that, if it's difficult enough to maintain a theatre in a town, sticking one on the end of the pier would add an extra level of expense, etc., to actually keeping it standing.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Yeah, I mean, getting stuff to it would have been, yeah, famously a nightmare, I think,
Yeah.
because it's on a pier. They were like, you can't drive trucks on it, and it was
Nope.
the end of the pier, so every bit of set had to be carried down by hand, basically, or in
Wow.
trolleys and stuff. And they were just like, yeah, it was not a date on a tour that people were particularly, excited about going to do, I imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Jamie, with your books, how would you describe what sort of subgenre of crime mystery? There's the term cozy mystery. Or how would you describe the genre that your books sit in, or do they sit in a genre?
I think it's tough, isn't it? Because I think there's a whole sliding scale from cozy all the way up to, hardcore thriller, basically.
Mm,
And
mm,
mine's it's towards the cozy end. But it's not too cozy. What I always want to do in murder mystery books is always take murder quite seriously, which is something, Agatha Christie always did, even though the books can be fun and the characters themselves might not take murder seriously. I think she, as an author, always took the actual murders quite seriously. And I think I want to do the same thing because I know, when you get down that real cozy end, sometimes the murders are quite comedic. It's a baker that's been, needed to death or something. It's like I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to be, a bit up from the cozy end, but I would say they are still quite cozy. There's no particular, or there is a bit that makes Bertie a bit queasy because he doesn't like the sight of blood, but there's no real, gore in these books. So they're quite, accessible for people that aren't into that, much more in-depth crime scene kind of stuff. And they are, hopefully they are a bit feel good. That's my plan anyway.
And that kind of leads into my question around, I think you've answered it, around how do you define a cozy mystery, or what are the typical elements that defines a cozy mystery? You said on the sliding scale, you're probably more towards the end of a cozy mystery. So for people who are sort of a bit confused, well, what is a cozy mystery versus other subgenres of crime? How would you answer that, or how would you describe that?
I mean, I've heard other people say that a lot of the time in cozy crime novels, you don't necessarily see. It's a bit. Oh, do you remember like the Avengers years back?
Mm,
People would always be shot or slashed to death, but there'd never be any blood. It'd be
mm.
completely bloodless.
There'd be like a
And that,
machine gun firing away, but nobody be
yeah,
no
exactly. Their
injuries.
shirts would be completely torn and ripped, and there'd be completely untouched bare flesh underneath it.
Yeah.
It's like
And
Austin
it's
Powers
not.
karate chop. There was, Austin Powers kind of is a real takeoff of the cozy, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's
Honestly, who
like,
throws a shoe?
yeah. Oh dear. But
Sorry, keep
yeah, I
going,
think
Jamie.
it
I
is.
interrupted your
No,
thought,
that's
thought
fine.
process. Cozy mysteries.
But um, but yeah, I think it is like that, and you don't often see the blood or the moment of murder. Um, but in a thriller, perhaps at the other end, it's a lot more, in depth, and you're almost living um through the characters sometimes. You're often seeing things through a murderer's eyes in those kind of crime thrillers, aren't you, sometimes? So it's a lot more, there's a bit more distance, I suppose, between the murder and the reader in the cozier end. Whereas, yeah, the other end, in the thriller end, sometimes you can be really immersed in those books. I can't read them before I go to bed because I'll have proper nightmares. Whereas like a cozy, you probably could read, a few chapters in before you go to bed without getting nightmares. Hopefully, you never know.
Yeah, mine's not a cozy. My books aren't cozy.
But
Oh,
the thing about, I do think when it comes to all crime books, really, there is, I won't say a coziness to them, but there is a comfort to them, even in those really dark ones, because, in all of these books, generally anyway, um, justice and fairness always kind of prevail. And that's a comfort to us that live in a world where, things aren't always fair and justice isn't always seen to be done. And I think sometimes, figuratively and sometimes literally you do see people get away with murder, but that never happens in a crime book. Even if justice isn't done through the legal system, there's kind of justice done in some way. And I think, for me anyway, there's a kind of coziness weirdly in that potentially.
Yeah, and that was something I was going to ask about when I said that was one of sort of the conversation points around elements of cozy being in even the darkest of stories, and I like that idea that the sense of justice, and whether it be traditional justice in the courts, or I really like those books that pose that question around, has true justice really been served? Maybe we find out at the end of the story that a family member of the victim was one that took out the killer. And there's not enough evidence to charge them, but we walk away thinking, well, true justice has been served. Or whether it's a vigilante story or one of those stories where a good person is pushed to do bad things in the name of revenge or justice. All those sort of questions that pose that question of what is true justice, and sometimes the outcome might be questionable, and different readers might have different points of view around, has true justice been served or not. But I kind of like the way you frame that there's always a sense of, I guess, hopefully there's some sort of closure in these crime stories.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, any book I read, and certainly murder mysteries, I don't really mind what the ending is as long as it's satisfying. You can leave things dangling, but like you said, there needs to be that kind of closure in a way, but like a satisfying ending. Especially in murder mysteries, if you get to the end of the book and it just feels like the author picked any one of the 8 suspects and like, well, they can have done it. It's like, well, okay, you've tricked me, but I don't know that I was left satisfied. I really love, and again, not to mention Agatha Christie again, but when she was at her absolute best, there was always a sense of inevitability to it. And when you found the solution, it could only be that solution. It couldn't have been any of the other ones. And, I certainly tried to do that. I don't know if I've quite pulled it off yet. But yeah, I really want there to be only one possible solution that then discounts all the others, because then you get left, even if you've guessed parts of it, you still get to leave as a really satisfied reading. When you put that book down, you're like, yes, that was great. Let me read another.
There is though in the me not wanting to give any spoiler alerts for my own books, but there is the certain potentially you can finish a story, especially if it's in a series. You can finish a story, but it doesn't necessarily end in a complete justice where then the bad guy is caught. I mean, Hannibal Lecter was escaped at Silence of the Lambs. He was pretty much a bad guy, and it leads on to another book. So there is that sort of potential for not having all of the loose ends tied off, especially when you're going to be leaving it open to a series.
Yeah, exactly. You always want someone to again carry on reading the next book. And I think in my books there isn't so much story or plot points carrying over between them yet. That might come in the future. But I think what carries over between the books is the relationship between Bertie and Hugh, and where that, it's very, very loosely drawn at the moment. I don't even personally know where it's going myself. It's one of those, that's my real pantser element to it, actually. I was like, each book is kind of planned out, but I don't have a plan for them in 8 books time, because we've still got 8 books worth of story or murders to happen with them. And obviously, just like in real life, our experiences change who we are, and how we develop, and our relationships with people around us. So it's like, until we've been through some more murder cases, it's like I can't really predict where they're going. So for me, that's my real kind of answer kind of element to these books. And it's kind of fun because I'm on that, I'm a little bit ahead, but I'm kind of on that journey with the readers as well. So it's kind of fun to hear where they think it's going as well.
And I think that really highlights the reason why we write. If you can find that enjoyment as you're writing, because you yourself don't know where the story's going, and you can really have fun with the character, it's almost like you're playing along as well. You, as you say, you may be one step ahead, but yeah, I think that's the fun part of writing. And even though I've, you know, for a lot of my crime books, sorry, a lot of my writing for the crime books is there's an element of planning. I still like the idea of I know what needs to occur this chapter, but I don't know what's going to roll out of the characters' mouths and the dialogue until I actually start writing that dialogue, and that's when all the fun starts, and the little segues and other things that start to happen, and I think that's the fun part of writing.
It is. I mean, it's
Nice.
almost like, I think writing sometimes, I've described it before, is it's almost like recorded improvisation. You know, when you're doing improvisation and you go and see improvised shows, I mean, some of them are terrible because obviously they're making it up on the spot and it's never going to be good. But the good thing about writing is you've got enough of a chance to go with it. So you can improvise a scene
Yeah.
and then tweak it and make it better. I mean, the good thing about improvisation and the reason they get away with it is when you see these shows, it's like there's often one really good moment in every show, and that's the bit you remember. You're like, oh, I can't believe they came up with that. And then when you sort of think about it, you're like, oh yeah, but there was 45 minutes where they just talked nonsense. But that's all part of the fun, isn't it, when it comes to those kind of improv shows?
Yeah,
There's one here in Australia. It's called Thank God You're Here. I don't know if there's a UK version of it, but basically it's a setup, and they put the special guest in a particular costume, and they've got no idea what they're walking into, and they just open up the door and they walk into a situation, and it's all been set up, and they've just got to go with it, and it's really funny. You know, some of these people are really clever how they just quickly pick up on, okay, I'm walking into a medieval scene, and I've got to quickly adapt and just improvise and just have fun with it. It's pretty clever.
It's funny actually, talking of, as I'm up for the Fringe, um, there are several murder mystery improv shows up here, and actually on TV, I've forgotten what it was called, Murder and Successful over here. That was kind of like an improvised murder mystery where a celebrity was taken through a murder case, but they had no idea what was happening. And it's kind of good because obviously with a murder mystery, there is a real framework to it. Sometimes it's like, you've got a chance to set up all the suspects, you've got a chance to do the murder, you've got a chance to interview them. So you often, with those ones, I think I've forgotten what they're all called. There's Murder She Didn't Write, which is up here, and there's a few other ones with good titles like that. And it's just, yeah, it's really fun to watch those. And again, improv with a bit of a framework. Again, is a bit like writing, I suppose, with a bit of an outline, you know where you're going, and a bit of structure. It gives you the freedom to kind of, make stuff up, which is what this is all about, really, isn't it?
I think the whole improv thing though is it's so that speed of being able to come up with something amusing and funny and like straight off the bat, and that's definitely a talent, because I can come up with funny lines, but it may take me 3 weeks to come up with it, and that's going to be a really boring show if you stand up there and have to sit there and sort of spend a couple of hours coming up with each line. I
you
think
text
that's
them all afterwards and be like,
yeah.
oh yeah, had a really good one.
Got a good one. Yeah,
I mean, there's
don't think
one
that's
up here
gonna work.
where they improvise a musical. So not only are they coming up with stuff, they're coming up
God.
with a tune and singing, and the musicians are like jamming along to it. It's insane. And I'm just like, my mind doesn't work. I'm exactly that type of person, when you have an argument and you're like, oh, I wish I'd said that. I just don't have that sort of quickness in the moment. It's really,
Yeah,
it's a real skill, isn't it?
remember the old I presume it's not doing it anymore. Have I got news for you, or whatever it was with the sort of comedy sort of news quiz. And I once went and I once watched or downloaded, I can't remember how I got to see it, but it was a full length version of one. And it was like total recording of it. And that's when you realize that they take the best bits for the half-hour show. The actual recording is about an hour or more, and then they cram it all down to all the best bits, which are the funny bits. And then when you watch the extending one, you're like, oh, this is not that funny. There's a whole load of jokes that just didn't work. But yeah, I guess that's what a whole improv show is. You can't have those outtakes.
Yeah,
I reckon
exactly.
stand-up
You're there for them all.
comedians stand-up comedians are the smartest people around. I reckon if all the world leaders, well, actually, I
There
don't
are
want to
some
go into politics. The current Ukrainian president's a former
Yes,
comedian, I
he
believe.
is.
So I
Yeah.
reckon the world would be a better place if I've often said I reckon the world would be a better place if all the world leaders were women for a start. And that's like for a better thing. I think women, you got all these little men with big egos trying to on a power play trying to take over others' countries. And you imagine if all the world leaders were women, how much of a better place this would be. But if they're all comedians as well, I reckon comedians are just such clever people, particularly the ones who do the improv. If they're bouncing off the audience and they might speak to an audience member and say, "Tell us your name. What do you do for a job? And is this your girlfriend? And what, you know?" And then they start engaging this conversation and just bouncing off, or how they respond to hecklers. I think they're just such clever people.
Yeah, yeah. I remember watching this one comedian, and he just mumbled and sort of wasn't very clear at the start, and then he started getting heckled. And what he was doing, as I worked out, what he was doing was working out the hecklers, and then just paid out constantly on this first guy who had, sort of gave him some grief just the whole way. Any sort of slowdown in his talk, in his show, he would just target this one guy again and again and again, and it was. He set it up from the get-go by doing this sort of slow start to try and weed out the hecklers, which I thought was quite a good ploy.
Hey, Jamie, just getting back to your books and your publishing story, a question I've got for you, and it's something you kind of flagged in terms of your own publishing journey and kind of where you sit. I think your comment was that the whether we're talking about self-publishing, hybrid publishing, traditional publishing, where do you see yourself fitting in terms of how you came to publish and what your future ambitions are regarding your publishing?
Well, when it came to these books, I did start off going down the traditional publishing route. I did go out query some agents, and I got some nice feedback from some of them, but didn't want to take it further. And yeah, it was kind of fun. And I'd sort of, whilst I was doing the querying process, I'd also started looking into self-publishing, how that might work. And I'm a bit of, when it comes to typography, when it comes to laying out stuff, bit of graphic design, it's like I'm into that. I'm a bit of a geek, so I was like, well, this is something I can do, and I think I can actually do to a good enough level to actually put in a book. So I was kind of looking at that. I was kind of looking at distribution routes, all these kind of things, and it got to a point where I was like, look, I'm going to give myself a cutoff date when it gets to January or whatever. If it hasn't been picked up by agents, I'm going to start the process of self-publishing, or get an editor involved, all those things that a publisher would do that you just end up doing yourself. But as it approached that date more and more, I was going, oh, I hope an agent doesn't take this on. It got to the point where I was just like, even though I was still sending it out and doing all those things, I was like, oh, I don't want someone to pick this up at the last minute, so I don't get to do it myself, because I was kind of really looking forward to it. So luckily it didn't get picked up, and I got to I got to do the self-publishing thing, which I think from that point of January took, I don't know, probably 8 months or so of getting it, doing more edits, copy editing, proofreading, getting the covers done, all that stuff. It took, a decent amount of time, because I didn't want to rush it. I wanted to make sure when that book got out there, it was going to be in the best possible shape to give it the best possible chance of success. You can spend all your money on marketing and getting people to pick up the book in the first place, but if it's not good, it's going to be impossible to get them to pick up the second. So yeah, that was really fun. But I think I'm not one of those. I know there's a few self-publishing people that are completely anti-traditional publishing. They're like, no way, self-publishing is the only way to do it if you want to make money or whatever your goal is, I guess. But I'm still in the middle. And I was chatting to an agent a while ago, and some of her authors, and it seems to be a lot more common these days than ever before. Some of her authors, she was like, yes, we do publish their books through traditional publishers, but we also work with them, and they take a cut for this, but they also work with them editorially on their self-published stuff as well. And she's like, it is actually, if you can do it well, it is the best of both worlds, because if you're selling the same number of books, yeah, you might end up making a little bit more money from the self-publishing stuff, but then on the other side, with the traditional stuff, you've potentially got the exposure and marketing weight of a publisher behind you, which is going to lift both sides of you up, the books that they're selling and your ones as well. So like, it does seem to be a real sweet spot. And also there is just kind of the prestige of being getting a publisher on side and going through that traditional route as well. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. The next book I'm working on at the moment, which isn't a Bertie Carroll mystery, isn't part of this series. It's my intention to again query that, send that out to agents and see if that goes anywhere there first before I decide whether I do self-publish it or not. I think maybe not, but we shall see what happens. It's just, I can't believe how much time self-publishing takes up though. That's the problem. I mean,
Absolutely.
there's a reason why these books are 2 years apart. The first one was 2022, this one's, we're now in 2024. And I enjoy it, but I would say to any author, if you are only interested in the writing, then self-publishing probably isn't the route for you. But because I'm a bit of, when it comes to, I like a bit of business planning and I like a bit of budgets and all of those kind of stuff. If you're into that, then self-publishing is a really great route to go down. But if you are not into that at all and you're not a numbers person and you're not into those sort of things, then I'd, consider whether that's definitely a route you want to go down to, because there is no difference between being an indie author, as it's kind of being known these days, and being an indie publisher. It's the same job. I'm being an indie publisher that happens to publish my own books. But if I had some more money to invest in other people, there's no reason why I couldn't publish other people's books. I'm sort of doing the same thing. So yeah, it's been an incredibly fun journey and I've really enjoyed doing it. But yeah, I'm not one of those people that's ready to turn my back on the trad publishing industry just yet.
And what do you find is working for you the best in terms of author marketing and promotions? I mean, we've all got to do this stuff. You got to put yourself out there and still be very proactive in marketing yourself and your book. So my first question is, what are you finding that works well? And also a second question, the fact that your books are set within the theatre industry, and that's the industry that you work in. Are you finding that's helping you because you've got a good network of potential readers? Is that helping you with your marketing of your books?
It's like I'm an incredibly shy person. So I'm not like, when it comes to being at work, it's like there are lots of people that know that I do this, but I've really not used them all to sell my book yet, which I really should do, because
yeah, you got to milk those connections
than me. I know, right? I know. But I did have, especially when the first book came out when I was still on Dear Evan Hansen, which was it's a small company of people actually, but they were all really supportive. And I was like, oh, do you want me to, should I bring in some copies for free? And they were like, no, we'll all buy it. I was like, oh, that's so incredibly nice of you. Thank you very much. So that was really, so I do have the support from all of those people, which is really nice to have. But sometimes you just have to not underestimate the power of social media, because every now and then I'll, do a tweet because there'll be an offer on, and sales will just skyrocket and go through not go through the roof for me. It's a very small roof for me. Do you know what I mean? But they, you do get these peaks just by telling people about it, which sounds obvious, doesn't it? But also it's tough. There's a middle ground, because it's like, I don't want to be one of those authors that's just tweeting about my book. So I
Mm.
often try and get
buy my book.
exactly, and it's like I often try and get involved in the kind of online community by posting about other people's books as well, and kind of joining that community rather than just shouting at it from a distance. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So that's been kind of fun. And then my favorite thing that I've done on both these books is actually do a book tour with a book tour company. I use a company called Insta Book Tours, and it's all run on Instagram. And it's been great. I mean, it does help sell some copies of the book, I think. But what has been more value about it, I think, is the fact that there's this community of people around you helping you and supporting you. Because these book bloggers have done, thousands of debut authors before. They've sort of done that journey up to publication day and beyond. And they've been a real support, just as kind of, a community of friends, really. And they're really excited about your book coming out. They're kind of like hype people. They'll really hype you up. And yeah, it's been really good, especially as, an author generally, but a self-published author, you're kind of out there a bit by yourself. It can be a little bit lonely.